He used to smuggle drugs. Then he got caught and he became one of the government's most valuable informants in the war against cocaine. But last night in Louisiana, Barry Seal's enemies caught up with him and killed him. Tonight, 3 men are in custody. NBC's Brian Ross reports that Seal was about to testify for the government once again.
Authorities believe last night's machine gun killing of top drug informant Barry Seal was ordered by drug bosses in Medellin, Colombia, who sent 5 men to Baton Rouge to kill Seal. Seal's son, Barry Jr., one of 5 children, was restrained by police, who said the gunman had waited in ambush for Seal at a Salvation Army shelter, where Seal had been sentenced by a federal judge on a drug charge to do community service. Seal was a tough guy TWA pilot who got caught smuggling cocaine and became one of the most important and daring undercover operatives, infiltrating the top Colombian drug operations. In a recent interview, Seal said he knew he was risking his life.
The old saying, if you can't stand the heat, don't work in the kitchen. I can take the pressure.
It was Seal who posed as a smuggler and flew into Nicaragua and took these pictures showing Colombian drug dealers and Sandinista officials loading cocaine on his plane. Seal busted up the Colombian connection in the Caribbean country of Turks and Caicos, setting up a payoff meeting on videotape that led to the arrest and conviction of the country's prime minister. And Seal was scheduled to be the key witness against this man, Jorge Ochoa, the top Colombian drug boss, now in jail in Spain, about to be extradited to the United States. Authorities say the Ochoa drug organization was responsible for the bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Bogota last year, the assassination of Colombia's Attorney General, and now the murder in Louisiana of the man who is perhaps the most important undercover drug informant ever. Brian Ross, NBC News.
Picture a humid Louisiana morning in the late 1970s. The air is thick, the kind that clings to your skin, and a small aircraft hums quietly on a rural airstrip. At the controls sits a man who looks at first glance like any other pilot. Calm, focused, unremarkable. But this is Barry Seal, and the flight he's about to take is anything but ordinary. The making of a smuggler. Barry Seal didn't start out as a criminal mastermind. In fact, his early life looked almost conventional. He was a talented pilot from a young age, eventually working for Trans World Airlines, a respectable career that required discipline and skill. But somewhere along the way, the structure of commercial aviation wasn't enough. Seal had a taste for risk, and more importantly, for opportunity. By the 1970s, he had drifted into the shadowy world of smuggling, initially dealing in smaller contraband. But the real turning point came when he connected with one of the most powerful criminal networks in history, the Medellin Cartel. Enter Pablo Escobar. At the center of that cartel was a man whose name became synonymous with cocaine itself, Pablo Escobar. Escobar and his associates weren't just looking for distributors, they needed logistics experts. They needed someone who could move massive quantities of cocaine across international borders without raising suspicion. And Barry Seal, with his aviation expertise and willingness to bend the law, was the perfect fit. Seal became one of the cartel's most valuable assets, flying low to avoid radar, landing on remote airstrips, modifying aircraft to carry enormous payloads. He transformed drug trafficking into a high-efficiency operation. At the height of his career, Seal wasn't just moving kilos. He was transporting tons. It's estimated he was making millions per flight. Money came faster than he could spend it. Luxury cars, properties, cash buried in the ground. It all became part of his life. But with that level of success came visibility. And visibility, in the world of organized crime, is dangerous. The double life. By the early 1980s, Barry Seal had become too big to ignore. Law enforcement agencies had their eyes on him, particularly the Drug Enforcement Administration. Eventually, Seal was arrested. And this is where his story takes a sharp turn. Facing serious prison time, he made a decision that would seal his fate, no pun intended. He agreed to become an informant, Seal began working with federal authorities, including the DEA and even elements of the Central Intelligence Agency, depending on the account. His mission? To infiltrate the very cartel he had once served. It was a dangerous game. Seal flew missions not just as a smuggler, but as a spy, gathering evidence, taking photos, and secretly documenting cartel operations. One of the most infamous moments came when he helped capture photographic proof linking Escobar's network to other criminal activities. But betrayal doesn't go unnoticed. The price of betrayal. In the world of the Medellin cartel, loyalty isn't optional, it's enforced, and betrayal is met with absolute consequences. Seal's cooperation with U.S. authorities eventually became public. Whether through leaks, mistakes, or unavoidable exposure, his identity as an informant reached the cartel. From that moment on, Barry Seal was a marked man. He entered a kind of limbo, no longer fully protected, yet unable to disappear. Despite the obvious danger, he was required to report regularly to a halfway house in Baton Rouge as part of a plea deal. It was a fatal vulnerability. The assassination. On February 19, 1986, Barry Seal parked his car outside that halfway house. It was an ordinary evening, or at least it appeared that way. Moments later, gunmen approached. They opened fire at close range. Seal was killed almost instantly. The hit was widely believed to have been ordered by the Medellin cartel, likely with ties back to Pablo Escobar and his associates. It was swift, efficient, and sent a clear message. Betrayal has consequences. Barry Seal's life is difficult to categorize. Was he a criminal? Absolutely. A smuggler who helped flood the United States with cocaine during a critical period of the drug epidemic. But he was also an informant, someone who ultimately turned against the very empire he helped build. His story sits at the intersection of crime, government operations, and moral ambiguity. It raises uncomfortable questions. How far should authorities go in working with criminals to catch bigger ones? At what point does cooperation become complicity? And can someone like Barry Seal ever truly switch sides? Barry Seal lived fast, took risks few would dare, and operated in a world where the lines between right and wrong were constantly shifting. His life wasn't just a story of crime. It was a story of choices, each one pulling him deeper into a web that eventually had no escape. In the end, the same skills that made him invaluable, his boldness, his cunning, his willingness to take risks, also made him vulnerable. Because in a world built on secrecy and power, once you become a liability, you don't get to walk away, you get erased.
The arrangement called for Seal to plead guilty to a drug-related charge and a charge of violating federal banking laws. In return for the guilty plea, the government agreed that Seal's sentence would not exceed the sentence he ultimately received in the Florida case known as Screamer.
I've reached exactly the type of settlement that I wanted to reach. Whether they're happy or not, you'll have to ask them.
You pleading guilty?
Yeah, I'm pleading guilty.
You going to serve any time?
I don't think so.
Dan Bardwell's belief that Barry Seal would serve jail time underscores the lack of communication and coordination between various federal jurisdictions. Bardwell apparently was being kept in the dark about the promises already made to Seal.
Is this a face-saving measure by your office?
Well, we've got an excellent source of information that obviously
He's already
has got...
cooperating with the government.
No, that's not correct.
He was cooperating with drug agents in
Well,
South Florida.
on one case. Now, he had no agreement with them, as I understand it.
Had he not been working with the Vice Presidential Task Force?
No, you'll have to ask them that. My information is he had worked on one case, and that was the end of it. That was the limit of his obligations. The 10-year sentence here will assure him and the government, I think, that is the sentence that he will serve.